All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for watching, listening, following, subscribing. I appreciate y'all very much. I am at one of my favorite places with one of my favorite guests. If you're watching on the video side, you can see that already. Audio side, I am live here at Imperial Pizza, and I am joined by Buffalo News, Buffalo Bills beat reporter, my man, Jay Skurski. What's going on, dude? How you doing?
Buddy, how you doing?
Good to have you, man.
Thank you.
You know,
good to be here again.
I had to go look it up before we hooked up here for some wings at Imperial. By the way, the second time you've been here with me now at Imperial. You were here last year as well. 6 times.
Six
times.
All right.
6 years.
What's the record? Is it Perino? I got to catch him.
Amongst Bills reporters.
Yeah.
Okay. It's got to be. Amongst the mainstream media Buffalo Bills reporters, it definitely would be our guy, Matt Perino. But 6 times for you, second time here, and never gets old, man. I like this dynamic. I like getting a chance to hook up with you in person, and you're also one of the OGs. Here's something that you are that Matt Perino's not. You are a legitimate OG with this podcast, going all the way back. I launched in February of 2018.
Yeah.
And right off the bat, I had Sal Capaccio was my first guest ever. Then it was Tim Graham. Then it was some book author. I don't remember who the hell that is. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. Much respect to him. But then I had, remember former Buffalo Bill Doran Dickerson?
Yeah, I do. Yeah,
he was 4.
Yeah.
You were 5.
All right.
5 episodes in. You were right there among the first 5. And this is episode 770.
Wow,
so
nice. You were still kicking around down in Florida, right? My old stomping grounds down there.
Yes, your old stomping grounds. Pray to God, if things go right in the future, stomping grounds yet again.
Past and future stomping grounds, right?
Every time the winters go by here, I just, I long for Florida during those times. But we're getting into the nice part of Buffalo, too.
This is like one of my favorite times of year, not because of the weather. The weather usually drives me nuts, but sporting calendar, April is right up there. I think I was actually going to put this on Twitter or on X now. What's a better sporting month, October or April?
Ooh.
Those are the 2 best in my mind.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
This is a great month.
It's a great month. I'm a Masters guy. You got the Masters. NHL playoffs are just getting started. NBA playoffs are starting.
Mm-hmm.
March Madness is wrapping up. The NFL drafts, which if you're into that, is big time. It's a good month. It's a really good month. I think it's this or October.
October's good, though.
I know. That's why I say, baseball playoffs, NFL in full swing, NHL and NBA starting. It's tough. It's a tough call.
It is. And we're going to talk some Buffalo Bills. We're also going to talk some Sabres, too, because you cover the Bills. That's your living. You are a Sabres fan.
Yes.
And are you a Sabres fan? Is that fair to call you? You go to games.
I go to a lot of games.
I like that because you go as a fan.
I do. I go as a fan. I pay for tickets or I get tickets from work, which are free, but I still go, right? Yeah.
You're not covering them.
Yeah, I am not there to cover them. I'm having a beer, taking my son who's sitting over there watching us right now.
Yes.
The Sabres were my first love in sports. I tell this story often. Alexander McGillney was my favorite athlete growing up. I still remember, first shift, first goal for him. He made me love hockey. My dad would take me to hockey games way before I went to my first Bills game. So I was I a Bills fan? Yeah, I mean, I was, right? You grow up in Buffalo, you're a Bills fan. But much more, I would say, in tune with the Sabres. Felt more connected to the Sabres than I did when I was younger. And so, yes, I work at the Buffalo News. Yes, there is a spirit of objectivity that comes with our job that I try to approach, especially when I cover the Bills.
Sure.
Whether they win or lose, that doesn't change things for me. But with the Sabres, I feel like, and there's been times where I'll fire off a pretty mean tweet.
I like it.
And because it's like I'm a passionate guy about the Sabres. I grew up wanting the Sabres to do well. Some of my favorite memories, the just out of college, those Sabres teams that were so good. What a time in your life, your young 20s and you're going to Chippewa and the Sabres are awesome. And those are some of my fondest memories with my buddies. And it kills me that it's been 13 years that they haven't brought that back.
I have conversations sometimes with my son, who's an adult now, who, by the way, I think I've shared this on the show before. you know my kid Shane. Actually, Shane and Jay play softball together. It's funny. You said he was fast, and I said, "Are you sure that you're just not getting old, man?"
I might just be slow. Yeah.
But anyway, he's new to hockey, so I mean, he's old enough that he could potentially have known about when the Sabres were good, but he didn't follow hockey. He's just into it now, so it's tough to really explain to him during that time when they were good, just how excited this town would be. I'm not going to go as far to say it's, like on the level of the Buffalo Bills when they're in the playoffs, but it's pretty damn close, man. I mean, those parties in the plaza during the Sabres playoffs, they were wild.
The car flags and the Let's Go Buffalo honking of the horns. And they were so much fun. And those teams were so darn good. And it's just, almost it's downright criminal, really, how bad they've been for so long. It seems impossible in a league that half the teams make the playoffs that you could miss it 13 years in a row. I know this whole podcast, there's probably people that are like, all right, talk about the Bills, jerk. But
we're going to get there, man.
Yeah.
This is our casual part of the conversation, man. No.
Yeah.
You know, what's funny is there was one game. I don't remember the game. I don't even remember the opponent. But what I do know is you were at the game. Again, not to cover it as a fan. And also our man, Matt Perino, was there. He brought his kid. It might have been his kid's first game, too.
Yeah, it was
recent,
something
like that.
Yeah.
And they stunk. Yeah. Like this, I don't even know if the Sabres scored. They might have gotten shut out. But I remember you had a couple of Sabres. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but the Sabres stink.
Yeah.
And Matt Marino, two Bills guys cover the Bills, are at the Sabres game tweeting about the Sabres stink. And I actually, I thought that was kind of funny. It's true. It's warranted, though, man.
I mean, it's right when the shoe fits, right? And I hate it for Lucas, for Matt's son. Yeah. I hate it for Elliot over there. Like, he is passionate about the Sabres. He loves the Sabres. And he never played hockey. I mean, it was such a hockey town, right? He doesn't want to play hockey, but he loves watching the games.
Sure.
And it's like, man, the product on the ice just and especially after last year, I think, there was such high hopes that they're ready to take this step forward. Were they going to win the cup this year? No, but I think a reasonable expectation was the playoffs, and to fall as short as they're going to end up falling, to look as bad as they have for long stretches, to just lack any sort of consistency. That's a franchise that has a lot of things to figure out. And, hey, I can relate with Lance and Mike, who cover the Sabres at the News. I've been there, right? I've covered that, that dysfunction with the other professional sports team here in town. And, the things have really shifted in that regard now.
Some of my favorite conversations, not just with hockey, but with anybody in the sports media, believe it or not, is with Mike. Yeah. Some of the, I'll keep them private because they're DMs, but some of the things, that we go back and forth with and have discussions about is entertaining for sure. Yeah, well, listen, man, we're going to get to some Bills stuff here in just a couple of minutes. You mentioned Elliot. Yeah. He's here. It's actually the first time I've met him. I've been following him now for years practically. I mean, he's not old, but, I've been following him now for at least a handful of years, in part because of golf. We're sitting here live at Imperial Pizza on a Thursday night. We're watching late coverage of the Masters live, which, by the way, we'll see how it finishes. But Tiger Woods looking pretty good right now, man. That could make really potentially in the next couple of days more interesting. But anyway, if people know you and they follow you on Twitter or just know you and they know Elliot, they know the kid can hit a golf ball, man. And I always ask you about this every time we talk and every time on the podcast. How's it going with him with golf, man? His swing, he's got the sweetest swing for a kid I think I've ever seen, man.
Well, thank you. Yeah, he turned 10 in March. He's playing a lot. He's been really passionate about practicing this winter, which has been great. Mm-hmm. If you ever get over to the Tonawanda Golf Dome, chances are you're going to bump into Elliot and I. He's there hitting balls, and I love his passion for it this year. It's been really exciting to see him want to practice. We were just down in Cleveland this past weekend. He won a tournament down there. We played practice round on Friday through a legitimate snowstorm. So that was our first round of golf in the snow. Luckily, the weekend conditions got a little bit better. But, yeah, we're just getting ready to start ramping up the season here. It starts in a couple of weeks, the local events that he plays in. So he'll have a busy season with that. And, high hopes for how this season goes. I know he's excited about it. I'm excited about it, and it's a lot of fun for me. I get to caddy for him.
That is awesome.
I got the bib and everything, and so that's really neat. And he's actually at the age now where there's a couple of tournaments where he'll actually caddy for himself, and that'll be an interesting kind of experience for him and for me, where I'm not able to offer him a lot of help or advice or anything like that. He's got to kind of do it on his own, and so I'm excited to see how he deals with that. But yeah, it's Buffalo is probably not the most conducive to raising a golfer, but he's doing awfully well with it, and he's certainly got a passion for it, which is good for me.
One of the many reasons why I love it so much for him and for you is because I've gotten to know you now through the years, and you want him to succeed. You want him to do good, but you also are out there because you want him to have fun, and you're not pushing him. And again, I know you, so I could say this. You're not pushing him out there. You're not out there yelling at him, making him do things that he doesn't want to do. You know what I mean? I think that's really important with kids. And sometimes we as parents can fall into that habit of you start living vicariously through your son. I've done it. I've admitted to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you don't want to push them too hard. You know what I mean? You want them to still enjoy what they're doing. You want them to aspire to be great, but you don't want to push them to a point where it's not fun for them.
Yeah, 100%. And that, that's a delicate balance, I think, especially when a kid is gifted, right? And I say that without any ego, but
no, he is.
I think he's got a skill for it, and that's like kind of going back to what I said before. That's what's been really encouraging for me is that this year, if you go back a year ago at this time, we'd go practice, but a lot of it was like, hey, let's go practice. Now it's when are we going to practice? He's asking the question, and to see that, and it's been a really noticeable shift for me this year, and that's been really encouraging. I still believe fully in being a diversified athlete, playing other sports. He plays baseball. He played basketball this year and loved it. Played actually coached with Perino. We had a lot of fun doing that together. So he's a baseball player. He's a basketball player. He's our softball team's #1 fan at every game. He knows Shane that way. So he loves all sports, which is really encouraging for me too. I think that's really good for a young athlete.
Very.
And I'm excited to kind of see, where, those different skill sets, how they bleed into the other sports and what that does for them. But yeah, in terms of the golf, I think certainly, there's a lot of potential there. It's a very competitive sport. We just talked about Tiger Woods, what he did for the sport, really what COVID did for the sport in terms of a renewed popularity, because that was one of the only things that people could do safely for a while. It kind of really, I think, grew the game again. And I think that's reflected in seeing, the amount of participation in his tournaments and things like that. So listen, it's not an easy sport by any stretch if anybody has played it, but I think there's a lot of value in it. And I'm really excited to see how it develops him as more than just an athlete, as a person.
Sure.
Because you're dealing with, it's all on you, right? I tell them all the time in baseball, you can go 4 for 4 and hit 4 home runs, and you guys can lose that game 5-4.
Yeah.
And that's not your fault. Or you could score 30 points in a basketball game and lose, 50-40, because, those are team sports. Golf is the ultimate individual sport where you're out there on your own. So I like those. I like the mix that presents for him.
And to piggyback off what you said, too, a little bit of advice for parents who might have young kids, especially if they're good at a sport. And being in Florida for high school football, when Shane was in high school, most of the kids who were getting recruited, the strongly recruited ones, one pattern is almost all of them played another sport.
Yeah.
Like even the best football players, they would play basketball too, or they played basketball, track.
They ran track to stay busy.
Yeah, weightlifting team. They did something before. Before I get going here, I got to pull up a comment too. Ed Helinsky, USFL says, What's the beer choice tonight?
Oh, it's
Stella.
It's just a Stella.
it's just a Stella.
Yeah, just one.
Okay, a little secret of the trade here. Jay's been known to put away a couple beers every now and then. I feel like you got a reputation for that.
Jeez, oh no, I don't.
Not a bad way, but Jay can slam some beers down when he's in the mood.
Come see me at the Queen of Heaven Carnival, right?
Go see at the Queen of Heaven. Yeah, get those big tubs of beers, man. Those are the best there in West Seneca.
Yeah.
All right, so let's kind of get down to business here. You covered the Buffalo Bills now, and they've been a good team for quite a few years. This offseason, I guess we'll start there. Just talk about, in totality, just how wild of an offseason. I know, especially covering the team, you knew change was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of veterans on this team, a little long in the tooth. You knew the salary cap situation was getting dicey and that Brandon Beane might have to make some moves that maybe he didn't want to make, which would be the first time in a handful of years where he really had to make financial decisions with this team. Some expected. I don't know if you expected, and I want to get your take on this because we haven't talked about it, but like Mitch Morris getting cut. I didn't know that was a surprise to some. Maybe Jordan Poyer before we even get to Stefon, because that's kind of like a separate thing.
Sure.
And I don't want to take away from the other stuff that's been going on this offseason. Let's start there. Let's talk about this offseason and just how busy it's been and how surprised are you by how some of these things have been turning out?
Well, I wouldn't say shocked. I mean, certainly you looked at their cap situation going into the offseason, and you knew that they had to make some of those types of moves. The Morris one definitely caught me, I would say, a little bit by surprise. But when you looked at the cap savings, and this is one reason I love Mitch Morris, at his introductory press conference down with Jacksonville, he said, from an economic standpoint, it made sense. So he gets it, right? And so if the player himself understands it, and they're usually the last to understand it, I think we in the media have to understand it too. But, based on his level of play, the offensive line as a whole's level of performance last year, I think you could look at that and say, ooh, geez, I don't love that they moved on from Mitch Morris. It struck me a bit as a Bill Belichick type of a move, the year too soon before the year too late,
right?
With Morris. But again, when you hear about the salary cap isn't real in the NFL, I point to this offseason for the Buffalo Bills to say the salary cap is very indeed real. Are there ways to massage it? Of course. But eventually, it's going to catch up to you. And in this offseason, it caught up to the Bills. I think if you were to ask Brandon Beane, did you want to release Mitch Morris? I'm sure the answer would have been no. But financially, they were in a spot where they had to do that. You look at the rest of the moves, right, in terms of the releases, I don't know that you could qualify any of them as being surprising, right? I think based on production, based on age, based on financials, all of those moves made sense. The Morse one, I agree, is the one where you kind of scratch your head a little bit, or you kind of go, ooh, I wish that one wouldn't have happened. But, and I know this is taking the answer a little bit beyond your question, but I don't necessarily know that because they made all those moves that they have to be a worse team, right? And I know that I think the national perception is that they have taken a step back.
Sure.
I've read a lot of, is the window closed for the Bills headlines, and I don't feel that way at all. Are they as good today as Brandon Beane just said last week after they traded Stefon Diggs? No, but the offseason isn't over. And again, we'll separate the Diggs conversation into something else. But when you look at the free agency adds and the free agency losses, they got younger, of course. They got more affordable in some spots. But I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, they got a lot worse, or maybe even a little bit worse. Like, let's see how these new guys pan out. And, if we want to be realistic about it, they lost in the divisional round 3 years in a row with this core of players.
Yeah.
So what are we really talking about bringing back here? Why is change such a bad thing at that point?
Beyond the talent, and this is something that may or may not matter, but you look at Mitch Morris and you look at Jordan Poyer and you look at Micah Hyde, Trey White, you lose a lot of leadership in that locker room. You lose a lot of accountability, I would say, in that locker room. Probably some guys that you look up to as somebody who covers the team. You're around some of these guys quite often. How easy is it? Is it easier said than done? Because it's easy to say, oh, well, now Teron Johnson's going to step up. Now Greg Rizzo is going to step up. Now this guy. Is that easier said than done to just have the next, crew of guys come in and be the leaders? Because that does matter on this team, doesn't it? Or any team.
Yeah, it does. It does matter. And particularly when you talk about Hyde and Poyer, and I'm going to single them out in the secondary just because they've been on the field for the most part. I know Hyde missed a big chunk of 2022. I sort of separate Trey White a little bit from that just because he had played so little. He had been around a little bit, but he was rehabbing elsewhere.
Sure.
So I'm going to separate him from that conversation for a second. And I don't want to sort of poo-poo the fact that they're losing a lot of leadership in Hyde and Poyer. And that is not easily replaceable. You're absolutely right. How much does that impact wins and losses? I don't know that you can put a number on it. I think it's very difficult to put a number on it. But, I mean, what Jordan Poyer, let's just talk about him for a second, was everything you could have wanted in a football player. I mean, the guy's toughness, his leadership, his accountability to his teammates, it was all there. You can say the same thing about Micah Hyde. Now, what was their performance level as safeties on the other side of 30 who have dealt with a lot of injuries this past year? I think that's a fair question to ask, but there's no question that replacing that leadership in that locker room, at least at the start of the season, is going to be a legitimate concern for this team. Right? It is going to be dependent on guys like you just mentioned. I think Taron Johnson, especially in that secondary, is the guy now. Mm-hmm. He has to be. Now, Taron Johnson with us in the media is very understated. Is he different behind closed doors? Is he different in the defensive back meeting room? I don't know that. My inkling is that he's not entirely different because that just strikes me as his personality. Mm-hmm. But does it require a more vocal style of leadership? Now, this team isn't without leaders, right? I mean, Josh Allen is a leader. Von Miller is, say what you want about his performance. I know we could touch on that if we need to. He is a leader. Don't get that, twisted in any regard. Mm-hmm. So there are still some. But, yeah, the leadership void, 6 of the 8 captains from last year are no longer here. That's remarkable. That's crazy. It's a crazy number, right? And so, yeah, there's a leadership vacuum, and somebody's going to have to step into that.
I'm really glad that you singled out Jordan Poyer, too, because he really was a leader. And if he's not washed up, and I hope he's not. I know he's going to Miami, and the fan of me wants him to be done. But that's what the Dolphins need, man. They need that kind of leadership. I don't know if you followed it, you were busy covering the Bills, but like the Hard Knocks with Miami last season on HBO, and it was like, where's the leadership on this team? You could see it in the locker room. They were ahead at halftime of that Bills game, that finale.
Yeah.
And they showed like a lot of locker room scenes. I was like, it didn't feel like they were even winning at halftime. Anyway, I think he can bring an element to Miami that's going to help them if he has anything left to give on the field. I agree about Trey White, too. I love Trey. It sucks. That's the shitty part about football, being a fan, when things like that have to happen, because everybody, you could have a divided opinion about Stefon Diggs, but everybody loves Trey White. You know what I mean? It's just an unfortunate part of the business with the injuries and on the money. And speaking of Stefon, all right, let's get to this. So he gets traded. What was your initial reaction? What was your level of surprise? How did you find out about it? Did you find out on Twitter like everybody else? How did you initially find out about it? And what was your initial reaction? Like, did you question whether this was real?
No, I didn't question whether it was real. So this is funny. I was on vacation last week when this happened, and I was I was down in North Carolina playing golf, and I was at Southern Pines, which is one of my favorite golf courses in the world.
Man.
And I got a text. I'm on a text group with a couple of buddies, and it said, "How's your vacation now, Jay?" And I said, "It's great. I'm on like number 12 at Southern Pines, and I just hit a real good hybrid into a par 3. I got a birdie look. Why are you asking?" And he's like, check social media. And so then I open it up and I see, Adam Schefter's reporting that the Bills have traded Stefon Diggs. And I sort of chuckled to myself because timing was pretty good for me. I was off that week. Full confidence in my colleagues at the News, Catherine and Mark and Ryan, to handle it. So I didn't really have to do much. And so I texted back and I said, "Well, isn't that something? I'm going to go hit my birdie putt now."
Did you hit it? Did you make it?
I did. I made it.
Ooh,
yes. Yeah, I did make it. And played a good round that day. And so Mark Gahn, one of my I refer to Mark as my mentor in this business. I can't say enough great things about Mark Gahn. Look up to him. And he texted me later that day, probably about 4 or 5 o'clock, and he said, "Wherever you are on vacation, I hope at about 12:30, which is around the time that the Diggs trade, I think, was announced, I hope that you cracked open a beer." And so fast forward to today, and before I came out here to do this with you, obviously, the news of the day, O.J. Simpson dying, Mark is on vacation this week. Now, Mark, whenever there's a Bills player from the past who passes away, Mark usually handles the obit because he's
got the perspective.
Yeah, right. And so Mark, being on vacation this week, texted him and said, "Mark, wherever you are, I hope you just cracked a beer," because now I'm, my day has been blown up and everything I was going to be working on has changed, and now I'm writing this. So It worked out where it was a fair trade. Big news happened last week while I was off, and then big news happened this week while Mark was off.
That is funny. That's pretty wild. You were staring down a birdie putt in North Carolina when the trade goes down. I'll say this too. There's some people out there that are saying, a lot of fans, and some of it justified, some media, some content creators, it feels like, well, Stefon gets traded and now all of a sudden you're criticizing him. Here's something I'm going to remember. I remember this about you. This resonated with me. This was literally a year ago. We sat here and did a show at that booth on the other side here, Imperial Pizza. We did a live show. And I remember talking, this was during the offseason too. And I remember talking to you specifically about Stefon Diggs. And even at that time, you took issue with the fact that he is a captain of the football team. He was a captain on the team and didn't speak after the season. So even back then, I'm not saying, this isn't me saying that Jay Skurski never liked Stefon Diggs and he thought he was a shitty player or a shitty person. I'm not saying any of that. But even going back a full year, you took issue with that. I remember that because he's a captain, but he wasn't talking to the media.
Yeah, is it the biggest deal in the world? If you're out there watching this, is that the first thing that you're concerned with? Certainly not. Of course not.
No.
But I think it is a responsibility of a captain of a football team to do that. I think he should be up there. Mm-hmm. I thought that he hung his teammates out to dry far too often in games that he maybe didn't have his best game, and he left it to others to address why that is. The loss to the Bengals in the divisional round a couple years ago, maybe being the best example of that. Now, that being said, I loved talking to Stefon Diggs. Sure. I found him as intriguing as any player that the Bills have had in recent memory. He was not an easy interview. Sometimes he refused to be interviewed. Sometimes but when he did speak, I thought he gave genuine responses. I thought he made the interviewer ask better questions, right? If he didn't like the question, he would call you out for it. He would call you out for it. He would push back. And I appreciate that. I'm not at all objecting to any of that from a player. If they don't think something's fair, then I think they can address it. Now, that being said, in regards to Diggs and the way that he dealt with the media, I think that's all secondary, right? That isn't the primary issue here.
Sure.
I think there are levels to what went into this team trading Stefon Diggs. Does his relationship with the media factor into that at all? Certainly not. No. But there's a lot that went on with Stefon Diggs behind the scenes that I think came out in glimpses in those media interactions, and I'm not going to sit here and say that didn't play maybe at least some part in him being traded.
I would say this too. So I should ask you this the first time. So I asked you what you were doing when you found out he was getting traded. The level of surprise, are you surprised that it came down to this? Because I feel like the general expectation was he's going to play this year, and then if they're going to move on from him and eat dead cap money, it would probably be after the season. Spread it out over a couple of years, the cap, it would have went down. They had a better out after this season.
Yeah.
But not only did they trade him, they ate everything.
Yeah.
Now, are you surprised that it got to this point? Without having to speculate, some shit went down. There's things that went down, or maybe a culmination of a bunch of little things that added up to a lot. But are you surprised that it came to it at this point right now?
I am. The $31 million is a big number, right? It's the biggest non-quarterback dead money cap hit in NFL history. That is, on its face, surprising. You can't say that it isn't surprising for a team to be willing to move on from a still productive player at that number. Screams, we've just got to get this guy out of here.
Yeah.
Right? And so then you start to peel back the layers of, well, why? Why do they need to move on from him to the point that they're willing to eat $31 million in dead cap? And I think the layers to that are multiple. I think there are many different reasons why they did that. And you and I were talking before we came on the air. And one of the points that I wish I had really maybe considered a little bit more going into this offseason, and I hope I'm giving him the right credit, but I think it was former Packers receiver James Jones who said on Twitter, and I thought it was a great point the more that I thought about it, was when a team proves that it can win without you, that's when you should be, worried as a player, or maybe mentally preparing yourself as a player that, hey, they can move on from me. Well, what did the Bills do the second half of last season with Stefon Diggs?
They won without him, or they won with him not being the focal point all the time, for sure.
Yeah, yes, he was out there, right? Certainly he was out there. But was he producing on a level that was commensurate with a $27 million a year wide receiver? No. Was he, for lack of a better phrase, was he just another guy? Far too frequently, that was the case. And I think they looked at that and said, we think we can win without him. And you add that to the constant sort of rumors that just never seem to go away about what his relationship with Josh Allen was, how he was maybe in the locker room, just overall. Now, he was voted a team captain, right? So we should not entirely dismiss that.
Right.
But there was enough rumors about, for lack of a better word, about what his relationship with Allen was truly, to make you think that where there's that much smoke, there's got to be some kind of fire, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to the age, right? 30 years old, turning 31 in season. This team, I think under Brandon Beane, has made a distinct sort of shift. The only real exception to it is Von Miller. But when you get to 30, 31, 32, they're moving on now, right? It's true with Poyer. It's true with Hyde. It's true with Mitch Morse. Now it's true with Stefon Diggs. So I think and I think a lot of the reporting on it has been pretty spot on, that it's a nuanced reason for this trade. It's not one simple reason, right? But I can tell you through some conversations that I've had with people who would know in the organization that there was Stefon Diggs fatigue, I think is probably the best way to phrase it.
I don't want to sound like I'm kicking Stefon Diggs on his way out the door, because that's not the case, and B, it's not just him. And this is a question I want to actually ask you, a mainstream sports media guy, a guy who actually covers the team full time, who's in the locker room, who's on the beat, year round. When it comes to the Bills, my biggest issue was Stefon Diggs and also Ed Oliver. I'm going to throw Ed Oliver out there too. I've said this a lot on my shows, so some people, if you're a regular listener, you know where I'm going with this. These guys do really good in the regular season. And then in the playoffs, in elimination losses specifically, they kind of faceplant. Stefon Diggs, 63 yards combined receiving in 3 elimination losses. Is that all his fault? No. The Chiefs game, he was a decoy to some extent. The first one, 2021, Gabe went off because nobody was covering him.
Yeah.
Whatever. And Ed Oliver, too, Jay, the last 2 years, he doesn't even have a solo tackle in the elimination losses, let alone a sack or a quarterback hit. These guys who were star players for the Bills in the regular season aren't playing like star players in the playoffs. Meanwhile, Kansas City, whose offense struggled all year, I would still to this day say Josh Allen played as well as Mahomes, even just this past loss. To me, it was like Travis Kelce playing like a star, Chris Jones playing like a star in the big moments, and Ed Oliver, Stefon Diggs, arguably the 2 biggest Bills stars outside of Josh, not playing like that. Do you feel like there should be more accountability for guys, what they do in the playoffs, as opposed to just the regular season?
Yeah, I mean, that's when the lights are the brightest, right? And that's when a guy like Stefon Diggs is supposed to be at his best. Why is Marquez Valdez-Scantling making plays down the field in the divisional round,
right,
and Stefon Diggs isn't? I think that's an absolute fair question to ask. Now, you can ask yourself, let's not totally absolve Josh Allen of some criticism here, right?
Sure.
He had Stefon Diggs open underneath on the play before the Shakir deep ball, right? If the ball goes there, or maybe that was the same play, excuse me. If the ball goes there where it probably should have, that might be a first down catch. That drive continues. Who knows how that game shapes up, right?
Right.
So Allen deserved a little bit of criticism there. But he put the ball, that deep ball, to Stefon Diggs on the money. Stefon Diggs didn't catch it. Let's not make any more of it than what it is. And that was true multiple times down the stretch this past season. Whether it was an overthrow, whether it was underthrow, or whether it was a straight drop, those two were not on the same page. And you can say all you want, well, yeah, they're close and the plays were there. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is making them. Stefon Diggs wasn't making them at the end of the year. And I think that has to have factored in here to kind of what I said before about maybe looking at the larger picture and the Belichick approach of a year too soon versus a year too late. The Bills got themselves into a situation where they had the cap space to do it now. If they truly feel that he's no longer a number one wide receiver, then maybe it does make sense to move on. Another thing that I think I want to say here is that I fully believe that Brandon Beane doesn't make this move if he doesn't have the next step in the plan. Right now, we don't know what the next step in the plan is, but I can't believe that he'd make that move without a replacement in mind, a reasonable expectation that this is how we're going to replace 150 targets a year, right? Because the Bills threw the ball more to Stefon Diggs than I believe any other receiver in football over the last 4 years. Devontae Adams might be close.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're 1-2 in terms of targets. So that's one other point I want to make about Diggs that I've never really understood, and I wish I could get an answer from him. I don't know that I ever will or that we ever will, but what situation was going to be better for him? I mean, the guy got paid. The guy gets the ball more than any receiver in football.
Yeah.
The guy is beloved by the fan base here.
Yes.
And he's got Josh Allen throwing him the ball. So where is the disconnect? It's
and they were winning.
And they're winning, right? They're winning a lot of football games. So where is the disconnect? I'd love to know it. I wish we could get an honest answer from someone involved, but I fear that we're not ever going to get that answer, at least not while they're playing.
When I go to training camp practices in the summer, I always lock in on maybe 2 or 3 things. And one of the things this past summer I really locked in on is how fans were towards Stefon, because last year you had him missing the first day of mandatory minicamp. You had the same kind of cryptic tweeting and all that other shit going on. Anyway, crowd was crazy loud for him. After Josh, he still was like probably the second most popular player on this team. Last thing about Stefon, because you're talking about Brandon Beane having a plan. I want to talk about that in a second. But ultimately, and maybe who cares, but in your opinion, how does he ultimately get remembered? Right now, shit's ugly as hell.
Yeah.
Fans, and in fairness, and I know how you feel about Twitter. You would shoot Twitter to the moon if you could get away with it. I get that. And I don't blame you because it can be such a cesspool. But between his tweets, him liking a tweet about some anti-Bills fans losing their shit over this. Anyway, that's now. A handful of years down the road, how is he ultimately remembered? Because he put up some numbers and no one else has done in 4 years with the Bills ever. But he probably, to some extent, forced his way out of here as well. When it's all said and done, how do you think he gets remembered here?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the team's success, after he leaves. I mean, if the Bills go on to win big, and I mean the Super Bowl in the next, year, 2, 3 years while he's still playing, nobody's going to care about Stefon Diggs. They're going to look at it and go, yeah, he was really good while he was here, but we've moved on to other things. Now, if Stefon Diggs goes on to win the Super Bowl, maybe in Houston, maybe somewhere else, right? Because now he's going to be a free agent after this past year. Mm-hmm. If he continues to maybe have these sort of coded, messages for Buffalo, if you will, then I think he becomes, not maybe public enemy number one, but I think that sours the way that people look at, his tenure with the Bills. I do want to kind of end it, though, by saying that I hope I didn't come across as too negative toward Diggs. I think that he deserves a lot of credit for helping Josh Allen become the quarterback that he is. I think he was, he is going to be viewed at that he should be on talent alone as one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in Bills history, right? I think Andre Reed is up there, Eric Moulds is up there, and I think you have to put Stefon Diggs on that list. Obviously the only thing he's lacking is the longevity in terms of the numbers and the years spent here, but on pure talent and on, we talked earlier too, I think this was off the air, but about work ethic. I mean, that guy worked. He absolutely worked. He was a great, great player for this team for a number of years. Now, he was rewarded for that, and I think there's fair criticism to be had for a lot of these circumstances, but from an on-the-field perspective, how should he be remembered? I think it's as one of the top receivers in franchise history.
We are live here at Imperial Pizza. My man Jay Skurski is with me. Elliot in the background banging out some Cajun dry rub wings. We should have went with those.
That's his.
I dropped the
that's his
ball
jam.
a little bit,
No,
man.
no,
I was
that's
in a
his
sticky
jam.
kind of mood. What do we? So we had some Jamaican jerk wings. We had some. I like the hot garlic.
The hot garlic was good.
Hot garlic
That
parm was really good.
Yeah.
What was the other one I got? Oh, hot honey Cajun. Too sticky.
Yeah.
Good. Tastes good. I mean, the taste was there, but just a little sticky for my liking. All right. So before in the first half of the show, you were talking about Brandon Bean. He ain't, no matter how ugly things got, he ain't making a move of that stature without having something in mind of what he's going to do. Certainly feels like it's going to be the draft. Draft is what, 2 weeks away now from today, actually. Do you get a sense of, I mean, they're going to take a receiver.
Yeah.
I mean, it don't take no, genius to figure that out. I don't need to have a Bills beat reporter to know that. But you kind of feel like everything's on the table. We were talking about this off the air. I feel like they could try to get all the way up to 7 or 8, maybe. It would be hard to do. They could do that for Odunze. They could get maybe in the teens and get Thomas, or maybe late teens. They can have a small move up because Brandon Bean does that shit every year, it feels like. Or they can stand bad, or they can move down.
Yeah.
Like, everything still feels like it's on the table, even though I kind of feel like the assumption is going to be they're going to get a receiver real early.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned to you that I find interesting about this year's draft is that the last few years, Brandon Bean has made it a point to say how his goal in free agency is to fill the holes on his roster, to allow him to get into the draft where he doesn't feel like he has to take a position.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can argue that he hasn't entirely been successful in doing that, right? We knew they were going to take a quarterback the year they took Allen. We knew that they had a hole at defensive tackle the year they took Oliver. We knew to maybe a little bit of a lesser degree that cornerback was a pretty big need the year that they took Elam, right? Mm-hmm. But I would be, outside of the obvious with Allen, I would argue that their need at wide receiver this year is as big of a need as they've ever had in the draft under Bean. And so how does that shape his approach? Because to your point, they really could do any of those moves, right? They could say one of these top three guys, Neighbors, Harrison, Odunze, is franchise-altering good to the point where we've got to make a big move up the board, and we're going to pay a dear price to do it, but we find it to be worth it. And the one deal that I keep going back to that I use as a reference point is the Mahomes trade, right? The Chiefs went from 27 to 10 and gave the Bills, I want to say, I know it was at least one future first rounder and I think like a fourth rounder. Let's call it a fourth rounder. So would going from 28 to, let's say, 8, would a future first rounder, number 28, you're going to have to sweeten the pot in some way. It's
maybe
gonna,
one
it's
of
gonna
those
have
2
to be
seconds,
more.
maybe one of those 2 seconds, or at least maybe a fourth and something that's going to be more than
it's going to be just more than 2 firsts. And would Bean pay that price? Now, the reason that I think that he would is because I look at this trade of Diggs to Houston and what they got back. They're looking at that Vikings pick, the second round pick, as saying they probably look at that as a top 40 pick, right? With Minnesota's with their quarterback situation, right? So if you're as good as you think you can be, and let's say you're drafting 28 again, and the hope is you're drafting even later than that. So you're talking about maybe only moving back 5 or 6 spots and not having a first rounder, but you're picking early second. I think that trade does give them the flexibility to part with next year's first. To me, the question then becomes, okay, that's the starting point for a deal to get into the top 10. What more does it take, right? Because to your point, it's going to take more than just 2 firsts.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a fourth this year and a third next year, a fourth this year and a fourth next year? I probably wouldn't do it if it was this year's second, because then you're looking at having 1 pick in the top 100 of this year's draft. That's not a lot of
agreed.
That's not a lot of draft capital.
Is wide receiver that big of a need that you're only going to have 1 pick in the top 100 this year, plus you're giving up stuff next year?
Yeah, and when you look at needing, I think they still need an edge rusher on this team. I second round to me needs to be edge rusher if it's there. If maybe it's defensive tackle, maybe it's safety. You've still got some needs, I think, on defense that need to be addressed in this draft fairly early. So I'd be a little bit hesitant about parting with number 60. I would not be hesitant about parting with next year's number 1, though, especially if I can hang on to Minnesota's number 2.
When it comes to like the receivers right now, it's almost like I'm befuddled because you can convince me in almost any scenario right now. If you said, Pat, we could get up there and go get Odunze, I could tell you, all right, well, you got your number 1 receiver for a 5-year rookie deal, a 6-year franchise tag. And this is assuming at some point you don't work out. I mean, there's always a risk.
Yeah.
There's always a risk when you move up, of course. Not
right.
every, but I'm like, that's covering pretty much Josh's prime. Another 4 to 6 more years of prime Josh Allen, and you got his guy. That could be worth going up to go get. You can sell me on that.
And it's cost controlled too, right? For the first 4 years, is very cost controlled. I love Odunze. I love him as a prospect. So I think the closer that I get to the draft, the more I like that idea. Now, the hesitancy would be to say, well, this class is so deep that maybe you find a guy, and to your point earlier too about having these options open. Maybe they go receiver in the first, they stick at 28 and say we're going to take one of them because we like them all, and
there'll be someone there,
and there'll be somebody there, but you got to like them all, right? And that's the thing. Let's say 6 go in the first round. Well, you didn't have a chance at 3 of them. That means 3 of them are left. You have to like all 3, and there's no guarantee that they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
They might look at Xavier Worthy and say, this guy is great, how fast he can run, but he's too small to last in the NFL. And I think that would be a very legitimate conclusion to draw. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I could see how somebody would think it, right? But then you get into the second round, and that's where it gets risky to me, because if you don't take him at 28, you don't take the receiver at 28, you're crossing your fingers that the board falls right in the second round, and I don't think it's going to. I mean, I think you're going to have to move up from 60 to get a guy in the second round, and if you're doing that, are we kind of, what's the cost then to move up into the second round, and how many, current year's draft picks would you be willing to part with? So lots of answer for Brandon Beane. I think this trade of Diggs has really put, I think it has handicapped him in the sense that it's not easy to make a deal with another team that knows you need something, right? Whoever the Bills are calling about moving up, they're going to know, hey, you guys have to get a receiver. It's not a secret. And so what does that impact the price to be? You know what I mean?
Sure. When it comes to a couple maybe potential big-name veterans right now, I don't know how you feel about it. I kind of feel like it would cost an awful lot of money to do that. Forget about the combo. I'm talking about like T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk. Those are 2 names that you see thrown a lot. Is that more of a fan creation, maybe content creator, not fabrication, but creation right now? And just realistically, like say it's going to cost you a second or some combination, but it's not even just draft compensation. You're talking about paying a guy, whether it's Ayuk or T. Higgins, long-term big money right now as opposed to a cost-controlled contract. Do you think that might hinder the possibility of Brandon Beane doing something like that?
I think that it's a conversation worth having, but the money isn't there. I mean, they can't do it, right? They literally can't do it right now. I mean, T. Higgins is on a $21 million, I think, franchise tag, right? Yeah. They have about $3 million in cap space. So how are you creating $18 million in cap space to bring T. Higgins in? Because I would have to double check the rules, but I'm fairly certain once you franchise tag a guy, you have to be able to fit that cap hit under even if he hasn't signed it yet, you still have to be able to fit that cap hit. So the Bills can't come close to doing that right now for T. Higgins. Ayuk, I want to say his contract he's on the 5th year, I believe. Yeah. So you're looking at, in the tens of millions for him too as a first-round pick. The money isn't there. Now, that's not to say that Beane can't get creative. Listen, he's done it before. He traded for Stefon Diggs, the proven commodity at wide receiver. So I'm not ruling out that possibility entirely, but it would require a lot of other dominoes to fall before you could really make that move. And, going back to the Diggs trade, the reason that I was surprised was because of the financials. I referred to it many times as what I assumed to be sort of an arranged marriage between the two. Clearly, neither side was entirely happy with the other, but I thought they had to stick it out because of the money. Now I look at it and say, because of the money, I don't know how they make a move like that.
Beyond the big 3, I'm saying those are obvious. And you still got a couple weeks left. I'm sure you're going to watch some guys some more, talk to some people, and so your opinion might change between now and the actual draft. But who are a couple of receivers beyond the big three that you like right now that you think could be a good fit for the Bills? Whether it's 28, whether they move up a little bit, whether they move back round two, just a couple guys that you think would be a good fit on the Buffalo Bills.
Well, I mean, I think Brian Thomas is, the clear number 4 in this year's class. And I think when you look at his height, weight, speed combination, I mean, that's everything you'd want in a receiver. I love the production at LSU. 17 touchdown catches is a huge number. So the question for him then is just how far does he fall, right? Does he get past, I think Cincinnati's picking at 18. That might be a team where they're looking at wide receiver, right? Especially with what maybe they trade Higgins, right? And then that's a big need. So Thomas would be, I think, in very early mock drafts, I had him taking Thomas, but I don't think he's falling to 28. I think you'd have to move up. And I don't even know if, like your point, that small move up is enough for him. I think it might require into the teens to get him. Yeah. And so that's a concern for me. A.D. Mitchell at Texas, again, the height, weight, speed is really intriguing. I know there's been some questions about, the effort on some run, on maybe some plays where the ball wasn't going his way. You don't like to hear that kind of thing. You look at who is this player replacing on the roster? Is it Diggs or is it Gabe Davis? Right? Gabe Davis gave effort. Gabe Davis worked his butt off. Every single year, he won the weight room, whatever they call it, the weight room award for hardest worker was Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis was a willing blocker. Gabe Davis played 95% of the snaps in games because he was given effort on every play. I don't know that they're going to go for a wide receiver who's the knock on him is maybe he doesn't give effort on every play. So that's a little concern for me. One guy I've been reading about, doing some research on lately is Keon Coleman from Florida State. I don't know at 28 necessarily, but he's the type of guy where I wonder if you move down to 33 to 34, 35, if there's a team, the Raiders, I think in my mock draft that I did, I had the Raiders trading up for Michael Penix, the quarterback, and the Bills moving down into the top half of the second round. Now, I had them moving down for Xavier Legette from South Carolina. I think he's a very good option, too. My thing with Legette is I wonder how similar his game is to Curtis Samuel's and whether there's enough differentiation there between those two. But Coleman is a guy that, 6'3", 220, didn't run a very good 40, but I don't know how much Brandon Beane cares about that, to be honest with you. I think Brandon Beane has always looked at the production on the field a lot more than the measurables in the 40 time. So Coleman is a guy that I think there is a possibility. And the more kind of research I do on him, I do wonder, late first to maybe a trade down in the second, I think he could make sense.
I'm going to give you one more scenario here before we wrap up with a couple of minutes of Sabres. So I got a couple questions I want to ask about Don Granato more specifically. But I had an idea in my head about a trade. And let's say the Bills stay at 28. And I agree. I think Thomas was not making it to 28. You got Mitchell. You got Legette. You got Lamb McConkey maybe. I don't know how the Bills feel about him. I feel like he could be more of a fit now that Stefon Diggs is gone. Yeah. He wouldn't have been before. But let's just say for the sake of discussion, you got those three, one or two of them are available, and you pull the trigger on one of them. Then you get into round two. And according to the draft value chart, if it's even like remotely feasible now or realistic, which I think it is to some extent, you could take pick 60. You got 2 2s next year. You give up your own 2 next year. You want to keep Minnesota's. You give up 2 2s. You still got your other one next year. That would get you up from 60 into like the very early part of round 2. You could come back. If you really want a double dip at receiver, you can, but I don't necessarily think that. But now you said defensive line.
Yeah.
Edge. Somebody like a Chop Robinson or, I don't know, there's a couple other guys out there.
Robinson
Could you see a scenario like that where the Bills, maybe they trade up from round 2 and they go get that edge or that defensive tackle or somebody on the defensive line? Sean McDermott's got some input. I should have asked you this too.
Yeah.
He's got some input on this draft. You know he wants a defensive lineman.
Yeah, and I think you can look at edge rusher as being a significant need, even with re-signing AJ Epinesa. I think the expectation is that they're moving on from Von Miller after this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Financially that would make sense. Then you got Rousseau going on to the 5th year. So you're looking at Rousseau, Epinesa, and then what, right? So to me, with as much as they rotate on the defensive line, I think edge rusher is a clear number 2 need, especially based on what this team did at defensive tackle. I mean, you could also make the case for defensive tackle. I'm more draft edge rushers early, though, than I am defensive tackles. I think defensive tackle you can find in the middle rounds. You can find 1-year contracts, which is what they've been doing a lot with these defensive tackles, right? Daquan Jones, I know, is a 2-year deal, but, Austin, was it Johnson or Jackson? The guy from the Chargers.
Austin Johnson.
Johnson, 1-year deal. Deshaun Williams, 1-year deal. So you can find the defensive tackles on 1-year deals. And so, but to me, if you can get an edge rusher, and to your point, it maybe move up a little bit in the second round to get that guy who can immediately step in and contribute in the rotation, but then potentially be a starter down the road when you move on from Von Miller, that'd be a nice get in the first 2 rounds of the draft.
I do a mock draft once a week. I don't like doing them all the time. Some people do them every day. In my mock draft, I actually took Chop Robinson, and I moved up like 2 or 3 spots. I gave up like a 5th and something else to go get him. And then 2 hours later, Stefon got traded. So I didn't have much of a shelf life.
Yeah.
But I could see a scenario, and I still could see it, Jay, where Chop Robinson could be the pick.
Yeah.
He is a traitsy guy, and you'd be able to speak on this more than most. Von Miller, from everything I've ever heard, is really good with young players on the team. You would get a year behind Von Miller, him teaching a young guy, how to adjust in the NFL, how to be a good player in the NFL. And then Vaughn probably goes bye-bye after this year.
Yeah.
Now you got a guy in a premium position a year underneath you. And then, like I said, in that second round, maybe you move up too for a Coleman or Leggett or Javon Baker, one of those guys. I still feel like that's in play. Do you feel like that's realistically in play, or does it have to be receiver before anything else?
No, it doesn't have to be receiver. I do think that it's in play. I mean, would it be my preferred method of roster building? Probably not. I think I would want to flip them. I think because the need at receiver is so great that I'd be a little bit hesitant to come out of round 1 without one. But, we got to see how the board falls too, right? I mean, it could, it could be at 25, 26 that all those receivers are still there and they do feel comfortable that they're going to get a guy in the second that could step in. But going back to what I said before about the need at edge rusher, it's not just a long-term need. It's a this year need too. I mean, your top 4 are Miller, Rousseau, Epinesa, and Tuhill. I guess you can go into the season with those 4, but they kept 5 last year, right? Shaq Lawson was the 5th. If you can get a guy that's got those, like you said, the traits that they look for as your 5th or potentially 4th, if he works his way in and one of those other guys, maybe Tuhill, becomes a healthy and active on game day, that's a good situation. You want to start preparing. I don't look at edge rusher as only a long-term need. I look at it as both a short and long-term need.
Brandon Bean he's not going to listen to the fans when he makes his pick. As loud as the fans, as long as we can be, he's not going to listen. I used it on the show yesterday. Marv Levy once had a quote saying about GMs and coaches, if you start listening to the fans, you're going to be sitting with them. Yep. Before we get out of here, Sabres, which, by the way, as we're recording this or streaming this, by the way, shout out, over 850 people watching this live right now on YouTube and Twitter. Appreciate you all. All right, so the Sabres are up 2-1 right now. Who cares? My question is, do you think that Don Granato is going to be back? Do you think he should be back? How much of the failure this year is on the coach versus the players versus injury, all kinds of other factors? Has he done enough to keep his job, or do you think they should be looking to upgrade there?
Well, I'm going to rule out injuries, first of all. I mean, every team has them, right? I don't know that you can point to those and say that the Sabres were overwhelmed by injuries. Yeah, it hurt. But do the players deserve some criticism? Of course. And that's always going to be the case. Whenever any coach is fired, you got to look at the players first, right? Because they're the ones that are actually out there doing the job. That being said, I would not bring Granato back. Now, I have absolutely no insight into how Terry Pegula is feeling about this, how Kevin Adams, if he's the guy, I think there's another conversation. Should he be back? But, let's assume that he is. I don't know how you can look at the starts of games alone for this team and say they were adequately prepared. I mean, what is a coach's job if not to have your team ready to go? And they were never ready to go.
29 times the opponent has scored 2 or more goals in the first period this season.
It's incredible. And then, you get to the regression from their key players, right? And that can't all be attributed to injury. It's not like every one of those guys forgot how to play hockey overnight. The idea that they were going to be more defensively responsible at the sacrifice of what they did so well, which was score goals last year, backfired monumentally. And then you get to the special teams. Their power play is probably the single biggest reason that we're here having this conversation and how bad that was.
Yeah.
All of those are coaching issues. So for me, if I was the one making the decision, there's no way I would bring Granato back. I have no insight whatsoever into how Pegula is thinking, how maybe Kevin Adams is thinking, but it's an open and shut case in my mind that I wouldn't bring him back.
Last question. You cover the Bills for a living. You follow the Sabres as a fan, which you've done for your life. There's a common denominator with both teams. Terry Pegula is the owner. There's also a common denominator with both teams. Dude don't ever speak. How much professionally and how much as a fan does that get under your skin?
Well, I think that
so it might not be the same answer.
I mean, I think professionally, there's a level of frustration. I think it's interesting because the Bills are at least from a football side. Now, from the business side, there's another conversation to be had there. They've been a bit of a mess on the business side, but the football side kind of runs itself pretty effectively, right?
Sure.
Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane know what they're doing. Now you can have the conversation that they haven't been able to get them over the hump, and I get that, right? That's fair, and I think that Terry Pegula should address that too. So there is a level of frustration professionally. As a putting on my Sabres fan hat, though, I think it's inexcusable that he hasn't spoken in years about what is generally
2020
perceived as one of the worst run professional sports organizations in all of North America. They have the longest professional sports drought, tied, I believe, with the Jets.
Yep.
That is embarrassing. It should be embarrassing to Terry Pegula, who famously said, maybe infamously at this point, that the Sabres' sole reason for existence is the Stanley Cup. The fact that he cannot be bothered to address these fans, to share what his plan is to rescue this team from the hell that it's been in, is incredibly frustrating, and I think a very poor business decision, because it's amazing that they draw the fans that they do. And I know the attendance numbers on a per capita basis are very low. Well, guess what? They could be lower, and they're going to be lower next year, particularly if they run back this same outfit, meaning Adams, Granato, and most of the same team. Because what reasonably would you expect to be different? So if I'll offer Terry Pegula some free PR. I don't know if he's one of those 850 people who are watching right now, or if this will get back to him, but you should probably address your paying customers at some point.
That's well said. And you know what? I mentioned him earlier. I'm able to shout out to Mike Harrington, because I'm going to tell you, man, it's very frustrating being a Sabres fan. I'll separate the two. The Bills are good. I can live. I don't really need to hear from Terry. Bills are fine. I can hear Sean and Brandon, but I want to hear from Terry Pegula on the hockey side. And Mike Harrington, say what you will, fans. I know he's got that love-hate relationship with a lot of fans out there, but he's one of the only people out there that will call out publicly Terry Pegula for not speaking about the Sabres. So shout out to Mike. Shout out to Imperial Pizza. Again, this was a great time, a good vibe, good wings. I could have did better with the choices, though.
Sorry, man.
Good choice. I mean, still good. But
Cajun dry rub next time.
Cajun dry rub next time. Follow Jay on Twitter at Skurski. Looking forward to covering the team, the draft, post-draft coverage. Appreciate you, buddy. Appreciate all you for watching and listening as well. Be back with brand new shows next week. Talk to you then.